And we are recording this. I just hit the record button. Thank you, Jessica, for the reminder. So if you do step away for a second, there is a record of all this. And so someone just chatted me, is there a chat box? And so I believe that there should be on the right-hand side, I think it's the last tab that goes down, there is a chat box. We'll go through some of the mechanics of the webinar once we get started for folks who may not be super familiar with this, but yeah, you're all on mute now automatically to control for background noise, but there are ways to communicate between each other. For anyone who's joined in since I last spoke, we are just waiting a couple minutes. We have a good amount of attendees, but definitely there are more that RSVP'd, so we're just holding tight, make sure everyone figures out the tech stuff and has a chance to jump on. So I think we can, if it's good with you, Jessica, and you're on, I think we can start getting started. People will continue to trickle in. Sounds
good.
Okay, perfect. So to get things started off, we are here to talk about the Clean Energy Standard, New York's new clean energy policy, and what is at stake. And so my name is David. I'm from the Sierra Club. I'm a Beyond Coal organizer based in upstate New York, live in Syracuse, but work across the region. And Jessica, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Jessica Azoulay. I'm Program Director with Alliance for a Green Economy, and we are a statewide coalition of environmental, social justice, and anti-war organizations working together for a carbon-free and nuclear-free New York. And I'm based in Syracuse, which is where I focus a lot of my work, but we also do a lot of statewide organizing.
Great. And so to quickly kind of just go through some of our goals and process for folks who this is the first webinar for. So our goal of this webinar is to help all of us that are on this call understand what the Clean Energy Standard is, what we can do to make it stronger, and the role that you can play in making that stronger. And so just a kind of brief technical thing. webinar format, I know, is a little bit harder to be engaged, to ask questions in the sort, so we're going to try and make this as easy as possible for everyone. If you have a question, there's two options. There is a chat box to the side. There's both a question and a chat box option to the side. Questions, I believe, just go to me and Jessica. Chat goes to the whole group. Feel free to use either. Or if you would like to be unmuted, there's a raise hand button in the webinar screen that you can click. I will see that raise hand. There's a pretty long list, so I'll try to just keep an eye out for it and make sure I'm catching everyone that raises their hand. But we can unmute you if you want to ask a question verbally, if it's just too hard to figure out how to type it out, or you just want to speak with us. So we'll try to get most of the clarifying questions in between slides and try to catch as many of them as we can. If there is a question that we're going to get to in a couple of slides, I may just hold it. I might say there's a couple of questions, but we're getting to them. Or if we're getting a lot of questions or complex questions, we might just leave some of them to the end to be respectful of time to try and get through this within the time period. We'll try to wrap up by 8 o'clock. So just want to be respectful of that. We're happy to stay on and answer questions for a little bit later, but if people need to jump off, we want to be respectful. Also, we're recording the webinar, so if you need to step out and watch a kid or something, you missed something, this will be recorded. You can catch it again. If you know people that are missing it, you'll have a link to be able to share it with them with that, and we'll be following up with those materials throughout the process. So to start off on the big level on what the clean energy standard is. So earlier this year, under the direction of Governor Cuomo, the State Public Service Commission started a proceeding called the Clean Energy Standard. So this is focused on the electric sector, and they wanted to do a couple of things. So then one of the parts that we are very excited about at the Sierra Club is their policy to mandate utilities to get more renewable electricity. And so that's 29% by 2020 and 50% by 2030. And it practically doubles what we have now over the course of the next 14 years or so. And so to give you a context of where we're coming from, right now we have 26% renewable energy. About 20% of that, a large chunk of that, is older hydropower, stuff that we've had for decades in our state. And then a smaller portion of that is the new wind and solar that we've been putting online. New York previously had a goal of 30% renewable by 2015. And so as you can see by that little pie chart, we missed that goal. We're at 26, so we're 4% under. And I think a big difference between that previous goal and what we have a chance to achieve now is the fact that that was just a goal. There was no way to force utilities to reach it. There weren't really any incentives. There was nothing, there's no teeth to it. And while this new mandate has that teeth, has a mechanism to force utilities about renewable energy, and we'll get into the details in a couple of slides. And if the renewable energy piece is sort of the exciting part that we're happy about, the part that keeps us up at night is really the nuclear piece. Jessica will go into a lot of the details in a second, but part of this larger policy is a mandate for utilities to buy power from unprofitable nuclear plants and to essentially subsidize those plants for a good amount of time. And so, I think we all on this call probably understand that there are serious environmental and public safety risks with nuclear. And once Jessica gets through all the details of the economics, you're going to be stunned about how bad the economics of this are as well. Sorry about that. And so how did we get to this point? I think it's important to realize that the renewable energy mandate is very much a product of the work that you, as just an everyday citizen have done and people like you. And it's been a multi-year process that we have been working together amongst different groups and everyday people to ask for a renewable energy mandate. So to look back in early 2014, there was a set of New York State energy plan hearings across the state, and hundreds of people turned out against dirty fuels and in favor of renewable energy. If folks can remember back to 2014, that was before a fracking ban, so that was a big part of the discussion, was people pushing for a ban on fracking, as well as a ramp up on renewables, because we know we needed to move in a direction. We also, so out of that process, you know, it was part of a larger campaign that banned fracking, and there was a lot of actions that went into that. But directly out of that New York State Energy Plan in 2015, they released a final version that included a emission reduction goal, so a 40% emission reduction goal by 2030 and then 80% by 2050. They included energy efficiency goal of 23% energy efficiency reductions by 2030 and a 50% renewable goal by 2030. All of this was pretty much in line with what the Sierra Club and our members and supporters were asking for, as well as a number of other groups. Then again in 2015, we kept going because we knew that while the energy plan was important symbolic step, it didn't have, again, any mechanism to make this stuff a reality. And so we kept pushing through the Reforming the Energy Vision process. There was a lot of ask, there was a lot of action in that. But one of the things people really came out in favor of was concrete renewable energy targets. And so then in the end of last year, early this year, the governor actually started taking our feedback into account and has put that mandate that we've been asking for into action. And one of the things over the course of all of these hearings that we've gotten direct feedback from Public Service Commission staff was that all the comments, all the public hearings, all of that pressure really helped. It showed them that people are passionate about renewable energy, that people aren't going to give up on it, and so that they need to be responsive to that. Of course, there's parts of this, as we'll get into, of the standard that we need to improve, that we need to work on, like the nuclear tier, and there's a couple of other nitty-gritty points. But we are moving the ball. There's more work to get done, but we are moving in the right direction. And I believe there is a question from someone. Let's see if I can unmute you, Warren. Hey, Warren, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
When is 100% renewable required by?
So this plan only goes out to 2030. And so in the Sierra Club's vision of things, we would be at renewable by 2050 at latest. I think that I think the administration finds it very difficult to make a plan. I think they're even struggling to make a plan to 2030. I think they feel like that's very far out there, that they can't make a commitment to that kind of larger goal. They think 50% by 30 is possible.
The administration?
The governor's administration, yes.
Well, if we get Bernie Sanders in as president, that's going to change.
Yeah, and I think, it's part of, there's the balance.
We can't wait that long. We cannot wait that long. Because
Yeah.
I've heard from some scientists' writings that 85 years from now, humans may be extinct if we continue putting carbon into our atmosphere. We have to stop it now, not in 30 years.
Yeah, and I think I'm there with you. I think, and we'll get into it closer to the end about what we're going to say at these hearings. And I think one of the things that we can communicate is that for folks that want a more aggressive goal, I think, because there's a number of groups engaged and there's all sorts of differences. For those that want to communicate a more aggressive goal, a more aggressive timeline going, this conceptually has the mechanisms to get us there, but you need to go bigger, is one of the things that we can say at these hearings and one of the things that people can bring up. And so I think it's good to point that out because it's a concern I've heard amongst other organizations and other partners as I've started talking about this and figuring it out. So there are many people right exactly where you're at. So thank you for raising that. And then I'm going to put you back on mute. If you have anything else to say, feel free to chime in a second. Thank you, though, Warren. So the renewable targets and tiers. So this is now talking about sort of how this will work and sort of what I was alluding to with Warren of the mechanism of forcing utilities to these goals. Tier 1 is for the new renewables. They do have increasing yearly targets for new renewable electricity. And so, again, I think one of the things that has been difficult is you set a goal for 2030. How do you get there? If you don't do any interim planning, you're at 2029 and it's, whoops, we missed our goal. So having these yearly targets on utilities is really important. Having penalties for non-compliance. And so if I'm a utility, I'm supposed to get to X% of renewable energy. If I don't do it, under this proposal, they will pay a penalty. And that money will go to fund renewable energy development or energy efficiency. The state, most likely an agency called NYSERDA, will manage that. There's a couple of questions about will those penalties be high enough? If the penalties are really low, then utilities, it's not going to compel utilities to act. But if the penalties are set at a high enough number, they'd rather just buy the renewable energy themselves. There's also a question about what the yearly targets are. Right now, too much of they're focusing too much on what's called backloading it. So most renewables would come online past 2023. We see a lot of value in having more front loading. And so getting renewables online now, and I think that speaks again to the point that Warren brought up of making sure that we have to move to renewable energy. We can't be pushing things off till later and later. We really need to start now. And there's also some real practical incentives, like economic incentives, like the federal tax credits. Those tax credits are available now. They may not be there in 10 years. And so let's take advantage of what we have now and really scale these up. There's also a tier 2, which is existing renewables, and that's mainly continuing to support what we already have. So the wind and solar and hydro that exist right now, we need to make sure it sticks around so that we aren't sliding backwards. It's a pretty unexciting tier in my opinion. And then Jessica, it's up to you for nukes.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, for tier 1 and tier 2, utilities will be required to buy a certain percentage of the electricity that they deliver to consumers from each of those tiers. And there's also a proposed tier 3, which is the nuclear tier. So the context for this is that there are 4 nuclear reactors in upstate New York. They are Fitzpatrick, Ginna, 9 Mile Point 1, and 9 Mile Point 2. And these reactors have all reportedly become unprofitable. So all of them are losing money now. We know that Fitzpatrick and Ginna are definitely losing money, and they're losing tens of millions of dollars every year. 9 Mile Point 2, we haven't seen the books on that, and we don't know how much they're losing, but there was a report a couple of weeks ago from the owner of that plant that they're quote-unquote losing a lot of money. So these plants are, because New York has a deregulated electricity market, and power plants have to compete in the market, and if they can't make enough money in the market to support their operating costs, they close. So these plants are headed toward closure unless something is done. And so the governor has instructed the Public Service Commission to prevent them from closing, quote unquote, prematurely, which just means closing before their licenses expire. And the mechanism for doing that is with this third tier, the nuclear tier, and requiring utilities to buy what are being called nuclear zero emission credits, or ZECs. So for tier 1 and tier 2, utilities will have to buy renewable energy credits, which are called RECs. And for tier 3, utilities will buy these ZECs. And as you can see on this slide here, the proposal has kind of projections for how many gigawatt hours of nuclear power utilities will be required to buy, and what percentage of the electricity that they deliver will come from nuclear. So starting in 2017, it's 4.6%, and then ramping up through 2020 up to 15.7%. And the only reason there's no projections beyond 2020 is because the Clean Energy Standard right now, the proposal from the Department of Public Service, only has targets for utilities for all energy sources, including renewable, through 2020. They don't sort of project beyond that. They don't put in kind of what the mandates will be beyond 2020. They just say, you know, in a couple of years, we'll set targets beyond 2020. Now, it's important to note that this isn't the entirety of nuclear power that will be bought by utilities, because there are profitable nuclear reactors in New York, such as Indian Point. Possibly 9 Mile Point 2 is profitable on its own if 9 Mile Point 1 were to close. This is just a percentage of unprofitable nukes. So it's the only nuclear power plants that are going to be eligible, according to the proposal, for these subsidies. It's unprofitable nuclear plants, and the nuclear owners will have to show that they're unprofitable. So utilities would be buying, by 2020, almost 16% of their electricity from unprofitable nukes, as well as, you know, other nuclear power from profitable nukes. And then this slide, I just put this on here to kind of give a final follow-up to both the renewable energy credits and the nuclear energy credits. This is an analysis that we did to kind of show, if this proposal is adopted by the Public Service Commission, what will the energy mix end up looking like based on the proposal that has been put forth. And so I'll just quickly take you through this slide. I don't know, it's a little bit blurry on my screen, so I'll walk you through it. I don't know if it's blurry on others. But basically, there are 3 types of resources that are going to be supported through the Clean Energy Standard. So you can see there's Tier 1, new renewables, Tier 2, existing renewables, and Tier 3, unprofitable nuclear. And in 2017, about 1% of new renewables energy would be supported or subsidized through renewable energy credits, and 11% of the electricity would be existing renewables supported, and then 5% of unprofitable nuclear would be supported. And then by 2020, those numbers would be 3% new renewables, 12% existing renewables, and 16% unprofitable nuclear. And then if you kind of extrapolate from that what happens to the rest of the energy mix, there's about 14 or 15% that is state-owned hydroelectricity, and that's not going to get state support, but it'll still be there. The reason it doesn't need state support through the Clean Energy Standard is because it's already owned by the state. So that kind of stays steady. And then fossil fuels and profitable nuclear kind of fall from 68% to 55%. That doesn't necessarily mean that those things are going offline. A good portion of that might just be profitable nuclear becoming unprofitable and becoming subsidized. So it might be a little bit of rearranging rather than actual coming offline, because really, as you can see here, all we're really doing is building to 3% additional renewable energy by 2020. And then, by 2030, hopefully we're getting a lot more new renewables online. But that sort of speaks to how, a lot of the additional renewables that could come from this clean energy standard are potentially being backloaded into this policy, and then not being eligible for the federal tax credit, and us not getting toward our goals as quickly as we would like.
Great, thanks, Jessica. And a couple of questions have come in on nuclear, and so before I answer them, there's a lot of couple of questions that start coming in. So if we are a little slow in getting back to them, it's simply with the number of people and the way this is designed, it's hard to look at everything at once. But the two questions we have in are, how many profitable nuclear plants are there in the state? And then what is the logic for the ZECs mandate to increase over time? Presume that they aren't abandoned altogether. Shouldn't they at least go down?
Yeah, those are good questions. So we know that Indian Point, which has 2 reactors, is profitable. We're a little, and we know that Fitzpatrick and Ginna are unprofitable. We're a little bit unsure about 9 Mile Point, which has 2 reactors, reactors 1 and 2. 9 Mile Point 2 is a newer reactor, relatively newer, it's not that new, and it's larger, and so it might be profitable on its own. 9 Mile Point 1 is one of the oldest in the country, and we've seen with older plants the costs going up, and the owner of 9 Mile, which is Exelon, recently announced that the plant is unprofitable. They just didn't say by how much, and so we're not really sure. We're also a little bit skeptical of that report because we saw in Illinois when there were unprofitable nuclear reactors in Illinois, Exelon started piling on, the number of reactors that it said was unprofitable, and when the regulators actually got in and looked at the books, it wasn't always the case that the losses were as high as they said. So we're just a little bit unsure about the state of 9 Mile 2's finances, but we do know that Ginna and Fitzpatrick are unprofitable, and we know that Indian Point is profitable. In terms of why the ZECs are rising, I believe it's because the Department of Public Service is trying to guess and project what will be needed by the industry to keep them open. So this policy, the nuclear tier policy, is about kind of complying with the governor's directives to the Public Service Commission to keep these plants from shutting down. And so I think the DPS staff is sort of projecting how much support nuclear reactors will need to stay open, and I think that they're guessing, and I think they have reason to believe this to be the case, that more support will be needed over time, that 9 Mile 2, if it's not unprofitable now, will become unprofitable because nuclear costs have been rising. And so the reason is just they're projecting that's how much support the industry will need.
Great, thank you. Just there's another question that came in while you were talking as well, Jessica. It was talking about the cost-benefit analysis, which we'll get to in a second. But the one question that I'm not sure if will be in there is, the new renewable mandate seems low given that New York Sun will achieve 3 gigawatts and other market activity. And so, and I actually might need some of your help on this one, Jessica. I know for the cost-benefit analysis, they were not including New York Sun. I'm correct. But does this 29% include New York Sun?
I think it does. At the technical conference on this clean energy standard, there was a staff person from the Department of Public Service that said that it does. So I think that it does include New York Sun. It's a little unclear. The documentation of the clean energy standard is pretty complex and has been hard for us to fully understand what they're including and what they're not. But I believe New York Sun is included in that. Okay. 29%.
And I would say, to the fact that this seems low, I think there is pretty good agreement that the 2023 target is the 2020 target is low. So 29% by 2020, I think we think that they've relied too much on the previous kind of backloading of putting too much of the increase on the tail end of the program where we think it should be much sooner. And so I think that there's pretty broad agreement there. One more question before I move us on is, what % fossil fuel will be taken offline overall? And so I think it's a hard number to say, because they're making a lot of projections based on how much power we'll need in the future. And so they're trying to sort of guess that out. But their goal is to get to 50% renewable by 2030. And so that will, if you see 26% increase in a 25%, 24% increase in renewable energy, you have an additional 24, that power is going to be retiring nuke and fossil fuel plants that it's replacing. I think there's a lot of factors that go into what power plants retire. There's age and location and the sort, so I'm not going to throw out a specific number. But I think, for example, the older power plants, so like New York's coal plants, some of the old natural gas plants, especially downstate, will be sort of the first ones on the chopping block because they're so old and inefficient. But I think a specific number would require a level of analysis that I have not done, so I'm not going to throw that number out.
I will also just add that these percentages are percentages of a pie of energy that is potentially going to change. So the state has energy efficiency goals, which we'll get into a little bit, but presumably the amount of electricity that we need should be falling. And so, the percentages are a higher percentage of a smaller pie. Or the pieces of the pie are bigger. And so it's a little bit hard to know without knowing fully like what our energy mix will look like in 2030. Like how much energy will we need? How much energy efficiency will we have achieved to know how many fossil fuels will be retired by that?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. So to keep it moving right into that other question that was asked about the cost-benefit analysis. So just a couple of, maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago at this point, the Public Service Commission did do one, and so that gave us some insight into what the impacts of this program will be. And so in terms of the economic benefits of renewable energy, I think it was exciting to see some concrete numbers, because often as an environmentalist, I say, oh, we'll get all these benefits, but it's good that someone did the analysis specifically to this program. So with Tier 1 and Tier 2, the renewables piece, the average net benefit they found was about $529 million through 2023. And so those benefits included avoided greenhouse gases, public health benefits, a little bit of jobs things, but I think they understated the larger economic development opportunities. I think there's concern that it wasn't full blown. But overall, they went through a ton of different scenarios based on interest rates, costs of fossil fuels, federal tax credits, and they found in pretty much every scenario there was a net benefit. In some cases, the benefit was over $1 billion. But regardless, it sort of confirms all that we have been saying as environmentalists at the Sierra Club, that clean energy, renewable energy will have benefits. This really knocked it out of the park in that case. There was a small impact found on average residential utility bills. And so that ranged from like 0.5% to 1% increase on the average residential utility bill. But overall, again, outweighed by all those external benefits that we would be receiving.
Okay, and so I'll do this slide, the cost of maintaining nuclear. So the cost report also talked a little bit about, very little, about the cost of the nuclear tier. So I'll just go through a little bit about what we know about the potential costs of nuclear. We know that, well, we think, based on kind of Entergy, which owns Fitzpatrick, it's reporting on what it's been losing. They're projected to lose $60 million a year. They're actually planning to close, but they're saying that if they stayed open, they would lose on average $60 million per year for the next few years. The Ginna reactor, which right now is being subsidized through a reliability support service agreement, which will expire, I believe it's March 2017, is losing at least $80 million a year. That number has been sort of rising, but it's around $80 million a year. And then 9 Mile Point, the losses, as I mentioned before, are unknown. It's also important to know, so the narrative from the nuclear industry has been the reason that it's losing all this money is because natural gas prices are low. And so they're being outcompeted by gas. And it's true that electricity rates are low right now, historically, because of cheap natural gas, but that's not the full story. Nuclear costs have also been on the rise. They've been rising nationally about 5% per year, and we're seeing smaller unit plants like Fitzpatrick and Ginna, which are older and also small, seeing kind of at the high end of that trend. So nuclear is getting more and more expensive while renewable energy is getting cheaper and cheaper. And the nuclear plants are facing competition not just from gas, but also from energy efficiency and falling demand, as well as increased competition from renewables. So the staff cost report estimated that the nuclear tier would cost somewhere between $59 million and $658 million for the first 5 years, which we find to be kind of a useless number. So the range is so wide, it's kind of impossible to make policy based on that. That's just such a huge range. We have estimated based on the actual losses that we know about and sort of what the market has been doing, that Tier 3, this nuclear tier, will cost at least $3.5 billion through 2030. And it's also important to note that unlike the renewable energy mandates, which David mentioned earlier, there's sort of this cost cap on there. If utilities don't buy enough renewable energy because the cost of RECs is too high or something, then there's a cost cap for consumers in this alternative compliance mechanism. But for the nuclear tier, there isn't a cost cap. The idea is to give the nuclear owners really whatever they need to stay open. And what they're saying is that they'll control costs by making the nuclear owners open their books to make sure that consumers are not overpaying. So the nuclear owners don't get to just report what their losses are. The Public Service Commission will actually look and see if those losses are real. But if those losses are really high, then consumers will be on the hook for them. And there isn't a cost cap or an alternative compliance mechanism for utilities to pay a fee instead of buying nuclear. So this is a big concern to us. The other thing to note about this nuclear tier is that while the renewable energy tiers are competitive tiers, they're going to be a lot of different types of energy, like wind and solar and other renewables, competing with each other and potentially driving down costs, and a lot of different companies competing in those tiers for the money from utilities. In the nuclear tier, there's just 2 nuclear companies in New York, and they're Entergy and Exelon. And if Fitzpatrick closes, then the only plants that are eligible under this program are owned by Exelon. So this could be a totally uncompetitive subsidy to one company, and there's no competition. There's not the reactors don't have to compete against each other because they're planning to have enough ZECs to go around for all unprofitable nuclear plants, and they're not competing with any other resources either. So if energy efficiency and renewables are cheaper, it doesn't matter, we would still have to subsidize nukes.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. A couple of more questions have come in, I think mostly on the numbers, and so I wanted to go through really quickly. One of them was a sort of clarifying comment on what I said before regarding the jobs, and so it's not that I was not saying that clean energy does not provide good jobs. It's that those jobs weren't properly fully accounted for in their cost benefit analysis that they did. I think they went very conservative in their estimation of that, and so Sierra Club thinks that the cost benefit analysis is probably on the lower end of things, not fully anticipating the benefits. And another comment that someone brought up was, we're talking about this in very monetary terms, but when they do, with the renewable energy piece in terms of when they calculated the public health benefits of that, it's very sort of crass, but they do take the lives saved and the asthma avoided and try to put a numerical number on that. They try to make it, there's a dollar amount for all of that. And so cost benefit analysis are pretty crass in that sense. They sort of overlook that human element of things. But of course, in moving to renewable energy, there's a lot of public health benefits, a lot of avoided climate change issues that are hard to quantify in these numbers. Just like with the nuclear tier, there's a lot of, I would say, public safety and public and environmental issues that are also, if there's a major accident, that's very difficult to account for and not included in these kinds of analyses most of the time. Let me make sure I got all of those questions. I think that was what we have going. I think the other clarifying question is, what do we mean in terms of the renewables tier? And so that is, I think we've moved them to a good place overall where they're talking about wind, solar, and hydro. And so they're not including, under clean, they're not including natural gas. They're not including other things that we generally find objectionable. So what is missing in the clean energy standard? So to quickly kind of go through, I think one of the things that we wanted to see in this and we did not see in this was a commitment to offshore wind. So if anyone's familiar with the Jacobson Solutions project, you have seen that offshore wind will likely be a large part of our renewable energy mix. So if we get to 100%, when we get to 100% renewables, that's going to be in large part to offshore wind. I think they estimated about 50%. And right now we're at 0. So there's a long way to go. The current proposal had no offshore wind at all through 2023 that they expect, which we think is crazy. And we really think that because the industry is so new, it needs a separate program. In New York, we had New York Sun for solar. And so we think we need a similar program for offshore wind to get it to scale, to get it to the point where it can be a viable industry on its own. And it also has, there's numerous benefits to it. It's located to large population centers, so you don't need large transmission lines. There's jobs benefits. There's a lot of pluses there with offshore wind, and one of the things that we wish had been in the standard, or we will be pushing to be in the standard. We were also upset to see that there wasn't an energy efficiency mandate. And so just like the renewable energy, when it's just a target, when it's just a goal, when there's no mechanism to make utilities actually do it, they're not going to do it. And so we think they need a similar process as the renewables tier, where there are enforceable yearly targets on utilities to have 2% energy efficiency reductions every year through 2030. this is in line with what other states nearby us have been getting with better programs. And so we think it's achievable, and we think it's a good thing. It's also really, when you talk about costs, energy efficiency is the cheapest thing you can always do. It saves consumers money over the long term. And particularly, I think when you go back and think of that, like $1 a month on a utility bill, this is a way to make that up. This is now a savings that everyday people can see, and particularly low-income communities where a larger percentage of their budget is spent on energy costs. If you can save them money, you're making a real difference for them. And so we think that is an important piece that should be in the Clean Energy Standard. And Jessica, if you want to take energy affordability. Hey, Jessica, are you still there? I was hoping to pass off energy affordability to you.
I apologize, I was on mute. Yeah, so right now in the Clean Energy Standard proposal, there's a little bit of talk about energy affordability and a goal of wanting to make sure that this is cost effective for consumers, but there isn't an explicit commitment to energy affordability, especially for low-income consumers. And this is something that's really important to us and to a lot of groups across the state, because New York has actually been seeing a pretty big energy insecurity crisis over the last few years. There was a study done in 2013 that saw that a million households living under the federal poverty level paid more than 22% of their income toward energy bills, and nearly half of those households paid more than 40% of their income toward energy bills. And even moderate income households that at 200% of the federal poverty level showed energy burdens that were higher than 6%. 6% is sort of the standard for what actually constitutes energy affordability. In 2014, there were over 177,000 households that saw their utility bills shut off for non-payment. So we're facing an energy affordability crisis in the state, and the Commission has instituted a proceeding to create better utility discount programs for low-income customers, but that program, which we had hoped would be in effect by the end of last year, is sort of on the back burner. And the proposal was pretty flawed and came under a lot of fire from consumer advocates and groups across the state. And so we think it's really critical that as we move into this clean energy standard and we're seeing potentially higher energy bills, especially if the nuclear tier is in there, because I think it's pretty clear that they've underestimated the cost of nuclear. We really want to see a commitment to energy affordability and a progressive rate structure in the state, and it's not in the current clean energy standard. Another piece that's not in there is a requirement that the renewable energy that's bought by utilities to meet the mandates is in state. They're going to allow out-of-state purchasing. They have some restrictions on it. The renewable energy purchased has to be close to New York, but it doesn't have to be in New York. And there also are no requirements to support locally owned or community-owned energy, which actually has the most economic and environmental benefit for communities if the renewable energy is locally owned and community owned. The jobs impacts are much higher, the energy dollars stay in the community, and they've also found in studying the issue that when renewable energy projects are locally owned, they face less local resistance. And so we think that the out-of-state ability for utilities to buy renewable energy is a little bit of a disappointment. We'll be talking about some talking points about that later. And then I'll pass it off to David to talk about LIPA and NEPA.
Great. So this goes to a question that I had put off earlier, but currently the Public Service Commission does not regulate municipal power authorities. It does not, so particularly in the two large ones are the Long Island Power Authority and the New York Power Authority, but there's also a number of small municipal utilities across the state. So as of right now, the Clean Energy Standard would not require that those entities purchase more renewable energy. It would not include them in the plan, which we think is a major oversight because both LIPA and NYPA together make up 20% of the state's total energy usage, total electricity usage. So not including them makes no sense if you actually want to be able to say the state's moving to 50% renewable. You need to figure out a way to do that. And they have done it before. They can find ways to motivate them, to compel them, to move them along to start a similar process that will get to the same place. But as of right now, the proposal does not do so. And so there are a couple of questions coming in, but just looking at the time, I'm going to try and hold most of them unless it's a very clarifying I made a mistake. But we're just going to go through and then we'll stick on a little bit longer, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time and just kind of get through the core pieces. So what's the process right now that we're working with the Clean Energy Standard? The first white paper, which detailed a lot of this, was released in late January. Just a couple of weeks ago, we saw the cost-benefit analysis. Right now, there are public comments that are open. People can go, and we'll have a link at the end of this for people to submit a comment, but the public can start weighing in on it. Those comments are due early June. And in the month of May, and we'll go through specific dates and times in a second, we expect public hearings. The end goal of all this is late June, early July, they want to finalize the Clean Energy Standard. They've been very clear that they want to do this quickly. And so they're trying to move this as fast as possible. But this is the timeline that we are looking at. And so there are a couple of ways that we can influence the outcomes. The first is to submit comments. And so you can go to Agree's website, that link right there, or the Sierra Clubs, and submit your own comments. I don't know about Agree's, but at least ours are customizable, so you can enter your own. You can also commit to gathering more comments through petitioning. And so, we can generate a lot of comments online. I think we're probably collectively as a larger environmental coalition right now, maybe somewhere around 10,000 or so. But we can probably do better than that. But doing it in person is a way of bringing new people into the fold, of having conversations and telling people this is what's happening, this is how you can get involved, giving them an opportunity, and we think is a really powerful tool. I know Sierra Club has resources for people that are interested in doing that to help you get started wherever you live, wherever you are on that. You can also sign up to attend a public hearing. We're going to go through the dates in a second, but those are opportunities to really come out there and put a face to the issue. The commission does appreciate large thousands of comments. That does help motivate them, but they know if someone comes that they're much more passionate, that shows a level of dedication, and they really take that into account. And often in all of these hearings in the past, there is normally at least one of the public service commissioners there. So someone who's actually voting on this at the end of the day will have a chance to listen to you if you are able to make it. We'll also be running phone banks leading up to these. And so if you would like to sign up for that, we recommend that you do and join us. I think that's really important. And I'm going to try out a new feature and see if this works. I'm going to launch a poll. You should have something on your screen that asks you, can you help make the Clean Energy Standard a true pathway to renewable energy? And if you can sign up and just take a second to think about how you can help. This is not an ironclad agreement. You will not be forced at will to do this, but it gives us a chance to see if you're interested in doing this, and we'll make sure to be following up with you to make sure that you have the tools to do this. We want to make sure that you have what you need, and this will be really helpful. So we'll just give that a minute to go and be on the screen. I'm going to take a chance to look at questions while I do that. So Jessica, while the poll is open, someone had a question back there about a progressive rate structure. If you want to give your quick 1 minute overview.
Sure.
I think it's more
sure.
on that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, there's a lot of low-income people in the state that are paying a huge percentage of their income on energy. And when you compare that to what higher income people pay for energy, it's really, the energy burden is really falling on low-income people in the state. And so a progressive rate structure would put into place good, robust, low-income discounts for people that are income-based. So if you're low income, you could hopefully automatically be enrolled or otherwise apply to get a discount on your bill to make energy affordable. And this is sort of going on the idea that energy is a necessity. It's a necessity for people. For a lot of people, it's a life and death situation if they don't have access to energy. It also, helps people be connected, helps people, be able to hold down a job, et cetera. So it's really a necessity in the society to have access to affordable energy. And it's pretty clear that right now we don't have access to affordable energy for all New Yorkers. And so we just think it's really important that throughout this clean energy standard process and throughout the entire Reforming the Energy Vision process, that the Commission is really committing to ensuring that as we move to renewable energy and as we do all of these other things that are really important to get us to the future energy system that we need, that we put an equal importance on this access to this basic necessity for people. This can come in the form not only of discounts, but also one of the things that my organization and a lot of groups in the Energy Democracy Alliance, which is a coalition that we're part of, have also been calling for a targeting of renewable energy and energy efficiency programs toward low-income people and ensuring that there's equitable access to renewable energy and energy efficiency, because for a lot of people, this actually does help energy become more affordable. Energy efficiency, it's obvious. If you're able to use less energy, then you see financial benefit from that. It's also the case with renewable, stable energy costs and access to the incentives and tax credits and public dollars that are going into renewable energy. If they're equitably accessible for low-income consumers, then that will help bring down energy bills as well.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. And this is my first time doing a poll, so I was figuring out how to use it. Jessica, are we back on the how to influence outcome screen? Does that look right?
Yes, we are. Yep.
Perfect. Again, a couple more questions, but I want to just wrap up very quickly and then open it to make sure we're being respectful of everyone's time. And so, Jessica, if you want to take this one.
Sure. So here are the long-awaited public hearing dates. These are hot off the press. They were released by the Public Service Commission today. So as you can see, they're planning hearings in Binghamton, Buffalo, Rochester, Albany, Plattsburgh, Oswego, Syracuse, Kingston, and Manhattan. And there's also a note at the bottom of the notice that there will be something held on Long Island to be announced later. It looks like in all locations, they're holding a hearing at 2 and at 6. And actually, the start times here, there's a public information session that starts first. It goes about an hour, and then the hearing starts right after. So the public information session's at 2, and the hearing's at 3. And then again, a public information session at 6, and then the hearing starting at 7.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. And
we'll be posting these
yeah.
on our website. I'm sure Sierra Club will be as well, with the actual addresses and everything.
Yeah.
In the next couple of days.
To someone's question, this PowerPoint will also get sent out as a follow-up. So it'll be there, but again, there'll be multiple ways that we reach out to you, as this just came out today. So we're just getting it all together. To quickly go through the talking points, again, after this call, we can send out a written list of them, but it's mainly the flip side of what's missing. The first thing is we want to ensure that it's enforceable. We want to make sure that utilities don't attack it and don't tear that piece apart. We want to make sure that nuclear is not included and clear that it should not be in a clean energy standard. It's not clean. It should not exist. We like to see a commitment to offshore wind and offshore wind tier within the standard, an energy efficiency mandate, power purchase agreements, more thought to affordability, and also a prioritization of local in-state purchasing. Kind of want to go through that quickly. We have it written out, but it's mostly something we've already talked about. Jessica, do you have any points to add within this?
No, just that, both of us on our websites will have more detail and a lot more information that you can use when constructing your comments or testimony. And these were, just sort of a list that a lot of groups within the environmental community have agreed on.
Yeah. And then that actually is a great segue. You just said that. The Alliance for a Green Economy website there is a great place to go for more content and more detail. The Sierra Club Beyond Coal website also will have things posted on there. And you're also free to reach out to us. I'm sure we'll be reaching out to you, but if there's something that that you have a question about and we haven't gotten to you yet, feel free to reach out to us. After this, probably sometime tomorrow, we'll be sending out the PowerPoint and some of the things that we've talked about so that you have that handy and a hard copy. So I'm going to get to a couple of the questions that I've been holding, but Jessica, do you have any final notes to add?
No, I just think that what David said in the beginning is just that, what we've seen over the last couple of years is that, when people come out to these public hearings and put in comments, it really does make a difference. We don't always move things as far as we want them to, but we have seen the governor's office, the Energy Planning Board, and the commission move in response and improve the policies that are put forth as a result of public outcry and public participation. So just encourage all of you to put in your comments, put in as many as you want, as detailed as you want on any of these issues, and come, if you can, make a powerful in-person statement at these hearings.